Hi, everyone. Welcome. My name is Kibra Zengin, and I'm the North America Regional Lead for Google Developer Groups and Women Tech Makers programs at Google. Thank you for joining us today, and welcome to Between the Brackets. Feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat. We would love to know where you're joining from. While you are doing that one, I would like to kick it off with an introduction to Between the Brackets. Between is a monthly web series where we host experts and Googlers to talk about niche topics on Google products and technologies. You can check out the website for more information on the schedule and topics specifically. We will cover web, Flutter, Android, Firebase, Cloud, AI, and ML themes this year. And we are very thrilled to have you join us today, and we hope you all enjoy the show. Housekeeping for today. As this is a great guideline for all of our events, I would like to remind all of you to be excellent to each other. To that extent, please follow all the community guidelines on our website and the links we share. Secondly, add your questions to the chat for our speakers. And then while we are asking, we will just make sure we prioritize those first. Lastly, we are here to help with your concerns, comments, or questions at all times. So you can share with us at btb-team@google.com. All right, now it's time for the show. Let's get it started. Today's episode will host two amazing experts on their fields to talk about Flutter. So making your Flutter UIs responsive and adaptive. So I would like to actually introduce you, Roman and Scott. So I will have them on the floor, but before I do that, so Roman is a GDE for Flutter, and then he works as a senior software developer engineer at Philips Health Systems. And Scott is the co-founder of Flutter Community, and he's a Flutter developer at DevAngels.london. So let's welcome them. Hi, Scott.
Hello.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Hey, Kibra.
Hey, how are you doing?
Doing pretty good. It is Friday.
Okay, happy Friday. And I'm looking forward to your actually exciting conversations between you two. And then I will leave the floor and then come back later. Enjoy.
See you again soon.
Thank you. Thank you so much, guys. I just wanted to put it out there on behalf of the Flutter community. Scott, you're an amazing influence in the Flutter community. So kudos to you for all the contributions in the community. I just want to say I'm a fan of yours. So I'm just like starstruck just by being here, sharing the stage with you. So,
you know, I have been called an influence before, but it was a different kind of influence. Let's just say. Yeah, I've been called a bad influence.
Great.
How's that? But no, I really, really appreciate it. There are a whole lot of people behind the community, not just myself, but also Simon Lightfoot, my co-host on Hump Day Q&A, Nash Ramdial. He is the one who is running the Flutter Community Medium with thousands of articles and 500,000 minutes read every month. Yaron Mir, Jay, he runs the GitHub with all those packages that would have been orphaned if Jay hadn't found maintainers for them. I mean, it's just a whole lot of people working together. So, and you've been doing a lot of it too, Roman. So don't sell yourself short.
Thank you. No, and again, I really appreciate again being in this space and sharing the passion that we have for Flutter. Yeah, I've also done some content on YouTube. I've also been focused on doing a lot of like one-on-one with the community, like doing collabs and workshops. I know maybe a few of the folks that are in attendance right now may have seen a couple of the sessions that I've been holding out there with the community. I'm really proud of doing that, and I'll continue doing so. So yeah, so let's kick off this show. The topic today, everybody knows, how passionate we are about Flutter, but we want to also share with you about like being responsive and adaptive as when we build our Flutter applications. So we're just going to share a few slides. We don't want to bore anybody. Everybody knows how Scott and I are not like your run-of-the-mill type of developers. We want to make things more, lively and all of that. So we're going to be discussing about responsiveness and adaptive. So first, a disclaimer. We are not UI UX designers. We're definitely speaking from the engineering standpoint, and we want to share our knowledge in that aspect in the context of Flutter. However, the topics that we're going to be discussing in here and some of the concepts that we're going to be talking are actually, they can even cross over platforms, technologies, even like languages. So that's something pretty cool. So if you can see in the screen, we want to demystify responsive versus adaptive, because we see that people use it very interchangeably. So Scott, you want to take it away?
Absolutely. Just one thing I want to give a quick shout out. Dan, I want to give a shout out to the Tohono O'odham people and the Pasquale Yeki. I did spend 9 years in Tucson. So good to see you here. Now, responsive versus adaptive. They are completely different. Okay, responsive, as the slide says right here, it's changing based upon what's available on the screen. And I would add not even just the screen's available real estate, but sometimes it has to respond depending upon what real estate is available for an individual widget, as Roman will go into here rather shortly, because sometimes that changes without the screen size changing. Also, adaptive, how you can change a functionality, and what that tends to mean is you want to double check what's going on with the app, what the user needs, and you want to adapt to that. Does the user have high contrast selected? Do they have a larger font size set on text scaling? Okay, are they using a screen reader for accessibility? So all of these things are very important to know, and you have to find out what they are before you can begin to, well, adapt to them.
That is true. That is true. And I love the fact that you mentioned, like those aspects, like, screen reader, because those are things that really we should even take into consideration, because we want to be inclusive as far as like building our applications, making sure that we bring everybody into the fold and not leave like users behind. And also the fact that you want to be able to leverage the underlying platform and the capabilities that it has in order to provide a very seamless user experience. And you will agree with me with this, Scott, where this actually goes with with Google's premise of achieving ambient computing, meaning like you want to be able to develop an application that a person just drops on one device and picks it up on another, while using the same application and doing like a very seamless transition from device to device. And then Flutter and like Fuchsia, now I'm even throwing Fuchsia, are going to take us kind of like to the promised land of truly. Yeah, I know, exactly. They're going to take us to the promised land of using like
everybody who heard that, we're going to make you disappear.
UI framework to build all of these experiences. So,
no, but absolutely. Putting the state in the cloud so that it can be accessed from anywhere.
That's true.
Okay, so let's see here. Are we starting with, well, these are your slides. Are we starting with responsive or adaptive?
Let's continue on to this one, for example. Like I just wanted to throw this phrase that I know that it makes a really good bumper sticker or a nice t-shirt. So I'm probably printing it out as a t-shirt, but I want to just put it there for people to see like what brings to their mind when they see a phrase like this, that they could use as a mantra when they want to understand constraints for Flutter. So, you want to give it a go on this one?
Well, constraints go down, sizes go up, parent set to position. As we've discussed in the past, I don't know if any of you have heard me say this. This slogan is a lot like pictures in books that teach martial arts. The pictures are there for people who have already been taught. The pictures are there as reminders. Okay, you can't learn them just from the pictures, and you can't really learn the layout system just from this slogan. But once you know it, this reminds you of it. So constraints going down basically means that from parent to child, it's passing down what size you could be. What are your minimums? What are your maximums? And then the child turns around and says, well, I need to be this specific size within that. And then the parent says, okay, we'll make you that size. and then the parent places the child somewhere. Notice I said somewhere. Interesting thing about Flutter, no widget knows where it is because the parent is putting it somewhere. So the child doesn't even know if it's, I don't know, locked in the basement. Hey,
That's
could be,
correct.
right?
That's correct. Exactly.
So now when you look at this, constraints go down, minimum and maximums. Sizes go up. The children are passing back up what size they want to be, and the parent puts the child somewhere. Now this makes more sense.
That's right. And then the great thing about this is that, like, as you see, the constraints go down, meaning the parent just feeds the available real estate for the children's of that widget to like render themselves accordingly. So that's exactly why we say constraints go down and then sizes go up, because the widgets just communicate back up to their parents. Now check this out. Some people have heard the concept of like MediaQuery. In Flutter, in general terms, MediaQuery is like a set of rules that kind of like they kind of describe exactly how at a given screen size, like your UI should render like one particular way. And then as let's say as your screen hits multiple breakpoints, like your UI goes under like a transformation, some sort of like it just rebuilds itself, showing accordingly and providing like a great user experience at those screen sizes. And those screen sizes is what they're called, like breakpoints. Breakpoints are nothing more than just like a pixel value where you've defined to be like a sweet spot of what your UI should look like, or like you should look at an optimal way under those let's say pixel values. Here, MediaQuery for Flutter, in the case of Flutter, is actually a particular widget that you usually use like at the top level to actually query like the window size. And if you see there, the MediaQuery.of is because you actually tap into the context to actually extract that information from the system, so that then you can query, okay, how wide your screen is, how high it is, and even you can pull like orientation information out of that. And if you guys have not seen an amazing talk that Scott has about the context, you will truly understand how important the context is in order to pull like this information. So Scott, if you want to just like do some sense on that.
Sure. Just as a side note here, James Blackwell made a really great point. Okay, ADA compliance, really, Americans with Disability Act in America, it's crucial for adoption. Now, in physical places, it's a matter of the law, but in apps, not so much. But it's actually something just as important. It's a matter of being uninstalled. So if you're looking to try to make any money with your app, and 40% of your users uninstall it because you use text scaling. You may or may not know, if you set text scaling in Flutter, you just overrode the user's accessibility text size setting. And the user is not going to be happy. And you're going to enter the uninstalled zone, and all that money you wanted to make from AdMob is not going to be coming your way. So keep that in mind. One other thing real quick, the MediaQuery.of context. .of is actually a function within MediaQuery, and it's being called on the current context. The context is a parameter. Now, what you get with this, actually what is returned, if we could take a look at my screen for a moment, we see the MediaQuery data object, which is what gets returned. This returns size, such as Roman is showing right there, device pixel ratio. Here's the text scale factor that the user sets for their preferences. There are all kinds of things here. Some of the insets and paddings, these show you whether or not the keyboard is up and covering things, whether or not there are notches in covering things. Here, accessibility navigation tells you whether or not the user is using a screen reader. Okay, this is all in your MediaQuery data object, and this is what you get when you run MediaQuery.of context. So we can bounce back now. And okay, hey, Saba, how are you? What do you mean exactly by overriding text scaling? You know, I wonder if he's asking that question for other people's benefit, because I see this guy every week. Overriding text scaling is if you notice there was a text scale in the MediaQuery data object. What that means is, did the user go in and say they want larger text on everything throughout their whole device because they have bad eyesight? Okay. If you set text scaling in your app, it's going to ignore that setting and it's going to do what you told it to. And the user is going to get mad because then they're going to think that you think you know what they need more than they do. And this is a bad thing. Don't do that. Okay. Boy, we need to get cruising right along. We got a lot of ground to cover.
I know,
Roman and I went over
Let's
this morning, and I'm looking at the time going, wow.
Let's continue.
Okay.
So here, this is just like a quick slide that I want to just put out there. Like, people have asked me, like, where do you start defining like what your breakpoints are? So a great way to start is to actually use like a general guideline on breakpoints based on like target devices, use of devices out there in the world, like based on like trends on like the type of devices that people use the most. And then you can start defining like some base values, like for what you think like the maximum width would be like for a mobile device, the same thing for like a tablet or a laptop or something like that. You can start with those breakpoints as a foundation, but as you make let's say progress in your application, you can start defining, for example, what it is like content-based breakpoints as opposed to like device-specific breakpoints, because the market is so fragmented and so saturated with so many devices and new ones coming out that it's hard for you to keep up with like older sizes. So you need to start with something and then you take it from there, because otherwise you're gonna have a really hard time kind of like maintaining all those screen sizes and be able to fit all your information within those within that real estate. And yeah, I just wanted to give a shout out to all the people who are contributing. James Blackwell, thank you so much for contributing. Very good friend of mine, Shava, and everybody else out there. Let's cruise right along because we have a lot to cover. So we also mentioned, remember, we talked about the MediaQuery. Also, which is actually when you want to do like things like you want to query, let's say at a global scale, like at a higher level, like your real estate available on the screen, like the outer screen. But you also have the layout builder. Layout builder is actually used more, again, like we showed earlier, for like how you want your widgets to know what the constraints are from the parent. Remember, like a parent has like Flutter builds the widgets in a hierarchy, and then the parent is the one that dictates what is the real estate available for its children to render. Constraints then is an object that is passed by layout builder to the widget hierarchy down the line, and then it's just a set of 4 values: max width, max height, min width, min height, and then the widgets just read these values and then they render themselves accordingly based on those constraints. Scott, do you have anything to show around this?
Not really at the moment. I mean, it's pretty. No, unfortunately, I don't have any up at the moment, but it's really pretty simple. You know, there's minimum width, minimum height, and maximums, as Roman just said. But when you put together the layout builder, what you're going to do is it's got 2 parameters. One is a build context that you normally just call context, and the other one is box constraints, which are normally labeled, as you see here, constraints. Now, Flutter developers have gotten to think of these terms so habitually that you notice Roman put up constraints without thinking about the fact that actually those are box constraints.
Box constraints.
This tells you he is an experienced Flutter developer. This is a good thing. He knows what he's doing.
I'm catering to the people who have been saying, we want more advanced content. So
more advanced. Oh, you wait. You've seen what I got coming. So anyway, I stole some stuff from Simon, and those of you who know Simon know what I mean. Now, what about smart devices like watches? You're going to want to go down pretty low, Alejandro, but it's really going to depend. You're going to need to look at the resolution of the device you're working with. And also, you really want to take a look at what the text is going to look like on your device, because just because the device has a certain certain aspect ratio doesn't necessarily mean that things are going to look the way you expect it, because the pixel density might be different. Okay, Roman?
Yeah, so here we have a couple of other widgets that are right out of the box that you can use in Flutter to actually promote responsiveness in your applications. Like some of you may have already been doing, like implementing the, let's see, at least the bare minimum of like responsiveness in your applications without even noticing. So that if you see here in this slide, we show you, for example, like how row and column are actually some of those flex widgets, and then the children of those type of widgets have to be flexible. For example, like the expanded widget, which is a type of widget that actually takes up the available space on one of these flex widgets, like a row or a column, or like a spacer. Like I told Scott a few hours ago, I was saying like, yeah, a spacer. I didn't know that a spacer existed. I was using like another type of widget because there's this phrase that we usually commonly use. There's a widget for that. And let me show you, for example, like this particular one. A spacer is not.
There's a coffee cup with that phrase on it. It says there's a widget for that.
There's a widget for that. And the spacer is one of those widgets that is actually composed of other flexible widgets based on the expanded with a flex of 1, meaning it's going to take up the whole space. And then the size box, which is just like an empty type of container, you could say, that then it provides just like a spacing for your widgets, and then you can provide like an empty space, and then you kind of even things up and make it more symmetric when you're let's say making things more responsive and all that. So that's like one of those widgets that like, wow, like I wish I would have known that like a long time ago. This is a tricky one that also you need to be like maybe people usually disregard, like they usually even force their applications just to be one single orientation, but you should also do like your due diligence when it comes to, let's say if your user wants a better like optimized way of viewing their application in landscape or portrait. So then orientation builder and MediaQuery.off orientation are your friends in that aspect, and then you can leverage those to truly accomplish responsiveness when, let's say, like either the device or the widget changes. So you have any you want to add 2 cents to this, Scott?
Well, I was just pointing out what you've already put there. They're very different. Okay,
and
the orientation builder is watching to see. Whoops, where'd it go? Medusa.
There we go.
The orientation builder is watching to see if the parent widget, or the widget that is the parent to the orientation builder is flipping. Okay, and what that's looking for is it will consider it to be portrait if it's taller than it is wide, and it will consider it to be landscape if it's wider than it is tall. MediaQuery.of for orientation looks at is the physical device moving. Orientation builder does not do that. Okay, so like if you're using desktop, if you're writing for Windows desktop, you want to use orientation builder, because if the user grabs the corner and starts dragging stuff around, as you'll see here shortly, the orientation builder is what's going to cause the changes there. It's what's going to be reading that. And Mohammed, I'm taking a look at this. The targeted breakpoints, you don't set them as dynamic. You set your breakpoints in hard coding. And what happens is as the application makes changes dynamically, like especially in Windows or Web or Mac or Linux, the user will be looking at you full screen 1 second, and then they decide to go half screen the other. Well, you just went from a 16:9 aspect ratio, right, to a 9:8. And it's like, wow, you can't display those the same way or it's going to be a mess. So the actual window size is dynamic depending on what the user does, but the decisions your app makes about how it's going to lay out, you need to make those decisions while you're writing the code. Sorry, Roman, shall we keep rolling?
Yeah, no, that's exactly. You couldn't have put it much clearer than that. I just wanted to point out that orientation builder has nothing to do with the device, but you actually made it clear because you can actually use it more when, now that Flutter has support for desktop and web and those, your users, how dare your users grab the corner of a window and start shrinking your application, right? Well, actually, I tend to do that just to see how people are doing it as well. So check this one out. Like this one is like an error that people usually get. And sometimes they don't even realize what is it. but it's good to point it out that this error, you actually get it, is really nasty, but it's just because you're using the wrong flexible components are added to the wrong parents. So that's why he says incorrect use of parent data widget. This is, for example, when you're trying to add like an expanded widget, not inside, let's say, a row or a column or a flex type of widget. So that is basically it. So that's
now
just,
I'm sorry, but for those who don't know, and I try to catch this, I always put myself in the headspace of someone who doesn't know what we're talking about, who doesn't know these terms. A flex is the superclass of row and column. Row and column are only convenience widgets for humans. The compiler doesn't care about row or column. A row is a flex with the directionality set to vertical, and it's hard coded. No,
exactly.
That's column.
And here you
and
can
then
see
row
it
is the
right
other
here
way.
in this one. Exactly. So you can see here like how row and column inherit from flex, while some other just like making it more readable for humans, we would say.
So when he says a flex, same thing.
Yeah.
Sorry.
There we go. So the fractionally sized box is just another one that we're very fond of, because now this one takes advantage of the available real estate, not based on the whole screen, but in the region in which it lives. Like whichever widget, let's say whenever you're rendering a fractionally sized box within, let's say one child widget, whatever the real estate is available in there, you take like this fractionally sized box will take those two parameters, width factor or height factor, and then that is just a percentage of the available real estate in there, and that is just a value between 0 and 1, and then he just expresses it as that, like a percentage of what of the real estate is. And then whichever dimensions you have in there, whenever you set it, let's say for let's say of 2.5, even if you're shrinking or expanding your window, it will always be it will update dynamically based on the dimensions that are available for that particular widget. So that is
now
that
one. I'm sorry. Well, one important thing in general, and it's the fractionally sized box is a perfect place to talk about this. If your app is truly responsive, you have not put a single hard-coded size anywhere. Zip. They're all done in what you'll see here shortly, aspect ratios, fractionally sized boxes, sometimes fitted boxes. Now, occasionally when you're using a fitted box, you might have to specify a size. That's not a set size. That just tells fitted box what the default size should be, and then the fitted box makes changes accordingly. So you're still not having any hard-coded sizes, and that's the right way to do it.
Totally agree. Like when somebody tells me like, okay, what's the minimum that you can implement to make your application responsive? The first thing that I come out with is do not set fixed width or heights. That's it. Simple as that. And again, last but not least, there's a bunch of other, again, like Scott and I could just spend the whole day just mentioning other strategies. But for example, we just wanted to mention a couple more as far as like the widgets that you can use to increase the responsiveness of your applications are these two, the aspect ratio and visual density. So aspect ratio, what it does pretty much is just calculates what is the largest width that it can allocate for your widget. And then after it allocates the largest width, then it calculates the height. Then it provides, for example, like the aspect ratio. Let's say if you say 16:9, for example, like something like that. And that's how aspect ratio pretty much works. You could also use it to, Scott and I were discussing, like to even calculate like the size of the font if you want to try something like that. Visual density is another type of like construct. It's not a widget per se, but it's just an object that you can define how thick things are in your Flutter widgets. And it only applies, for example, specifically to like the material library, where like around the buttons you'll see them like a little bit fatter, like a little bit more spacing, because it increases the touchability of some components, again increasing like the accessibility of those components. That's why you could use the visual density for that, and you can inject it all the way at the top, like maybe through the theme, and then it trickles down to all the widgets in your application. So and then that's something that you can even set programmatically. So yeah, that's pretty much it about like the aspect ratio and visual density. I don't know, Scott, if you want to add something to those.
Really, what I'm about to say, Roman already said. I'm just going to phrase it in a different way that sometimes people might understand this other way better, or his way better. Who knows? When you're dealing with aspect ratio, it is based on the width, because that's the starting point. So what ends up happening is it looks at the width, and if you have, say, a 16:9 or a 4:3 aspect ratio, the first number is the width, second number is the height. The way the algorithm actually works is it's going to look at the width and say your aspect ratio is 3:4. It's going to chop that width into 4, multiply it times 3, and that's your height, as long as there's room for it. If there's not room for it, it's going to take the maximum available height, chop that into 3, multiply it times 4, and make that the width. So, yeah,
I like your way
that's
better.
how that one
I'm sticking with your way. I'm sticking with your way. So check this
I'm
out.
glad somebody does.
I see a question in the. I see a question in
Yeah,
the.
I was.
About
Raphael.
yeah, go ahead.
Oh no, I was just going to say, Raphael. It
Raphael.
actually is even more important for web, pretty much, than just about anything else, because the web browser is the one place where people are going to be yanking that window all over the place.
All the time.
Yeah, some people are going to have it on half the screen to the left, half the screen to the top, full screen on a 16:9 monitor, full screen on a different aspect ratio monitor. Who knows what they've got, right? This is why a lot of web designers set things to be a max of 956 in order to try to overcome some of these problems. But and actually REM, VH, PX, actually none of the above, honestly. We use logical pixels in Flutter, and don't worry about the details, but what this really runs down to is, unlike Android, where you're using PX, SP, DP, what we do is the numbers are not labeled, and the scaling of them is the same no matter what you're dealing with, no matter whether it's text or a box or a picture, anything. They're all based on the same pixel size. And logical pixels, they're not exactly the same, but you can think of them as density independent pixels, basically. So if you've got something like a Samsung Galaxy S9 with a super ridiculous, I think it's 589 pixels is the density on it. It's nuts. Okay. And then there are ones with down to like 430. But the nice thing about logical pixels is they're going to look exactly the same regardless of which one of those you're working with. And the logical pixels, really, they're another way of trying to deal with the fact that devices do have different densities in the screens.
Correct. But again, another thing is for people not to get confused, because Flutter also produces like a web package, and you can also do web. It's not the same as when you do like CS,
right?
For the web. So Flutter still considers everything like a logical pixel, even if it's outputting something for the web. And for you, Raphael, I would say yes, like REM or VH could be used as opposed to pixels, because then that would allow you to make your web application more fluid. But that's when you're dealing with pure web technologies, like I'm talking about like CSS and all that, you can use those terms. But back in Flutter, you still deal with the logical pixels, which is a little different. But at the end, kind of like the core approach is the same. Don't use like hard-coded pixels to like size your things. You have to make your application very fluid so that it accommodates better to the multiple screens that your application renders. Great. I love the questions. Alrighty. Great. So
we've got about 10 minutes. So Roman, you're familiar with this. Oh, I'm sorry. Go right ahead. Fitted box.
I thought we were done with the screens. I think this was probably like the last one. I know that you're very fond of that. I'm just gonna throw out there and let you speak about that one.
Well, fitted box. It's, in short, the fitted box will shrink things as needed in order to make sure that they don't overflow if the area you're working with gets small. Now, this is particularly handy in things like your app bar. If you've got a title that's kind of iffy, as to whether or not it's going to fit, put it in a fitted box. Okay, and then what will happen is the text will shrink down in size to make sure that it fits within that line. Now, in most cases, this is going to make the text single line. There are a lot of other things you can do with a fitted box. One of the main things to understand with it, actually two. First of all, you need to give it a size. The child has to have a size, otherwise the fitted box doesn't know what the baseline is.
Sure.
If you have a text, it will look at the size that text is just straight up. Like if it's 22 font size, it'll look at that and how long the word is and or the sentence and figure it out from there. Other things, if you have a box that's a color or a box with an image in it, it needs to know what the size of that is so it knows a starting point. And then it will start shrinking it. But here's another interesting thing. Not only will it shrink it, if your area gets bigger than you expected, it's going to start blowing your thing up, making it huge. You might not want that with text, especially. So what you can do then, what's happening is the constraints, the minimum and maximums being passed down to it, are what's called tight. And in short, when you have tight constraints, minimum and maximum are exactly the same. It forces it to be a certain size. So what's happening is the parent is getting bigger than you thought, and it's telling the child, your text, that it has to be a minimum of the size the parent is, which is blowing things up. So the way you do that is you do what we call breaking the constraints loose, or just breaking them. The way you do that is by putting something in there that changes those tight constraints to loose constraints. Most people think center. Actually, center is just an align widget with its alignment set to center.
Center, exactly.
But an align is a great way to break those constraints. And then that way, what will happen is your text will shrink, but once it gets back up to its standard size, it's not going to get any bigger. So that's that in a nutshell.
Great.
Okay, so let's see here. We had looked at some code and some other things here real quick. And here we go. Now, this is some code that was done mainly by Simon Lightfoot, actually on Wednesday, when we did the Hump Day Q&A stream about this. We had a question about this very subject. So in short, MediaQuery has some issues. And the problem with it is, number one, it's expensive. Number two, if you put it in the wrong place and you do it wrong, it's going to get called over and over and over and over and over again. And this is bad. This is very bad. So I need to make a change here, and I'm hoping this is going to work right.
Let's hope.
Let's see how StreamYard does this. I'm going to try to share my screen because I want to show something. So let's see how this works.
Yeah, and while you do that, just wanted to encourage anybody who has a question in the chat, they can just drop it and we can start answering additional questions. And people in the chat.
Okay, so is this going to show correctly? Can you see that?
It is. It's showing.
It's showing. Okay. Here's the code. We will make this bigger. So what's going on here is this little Windows app, if you can see that. See, this is what happens when you have a 43-inch monitor and you try and do things on it. For the screen, that is. So what we're doing here is this variable called bad don't do this MediaQuery is a bad idea. You don't want to do this because it's putting the MediaQuery.ofContext in the build method. And to show you how many times this gets run, we're going to do builds +1. And we're also going to key this. Now, the reason you would want to check this MediaQuery is, especially on Windows, you would be looking at the size of the screen and say, if it gets beneath 1,000 or equal to, then we're going to look at I'm sorry, if it's greater than 1,000 or equal to, we're going to open up the sidebar here, the red sidebar. But if we go less than 1,000 wide, we're going to get rid of it. It's got a little bit of a problem, okay? What happens is if the size of the window changes, it's going to run a media query, and it's going to do this on every single frame. All right. Now, that was a restart. We have 2 rebuilds over here on the left because what happens is as soon as your app is started for the very first time, the tree is run twice. Details, schmetails. Look, just trust me. So, but what's going to happen over here, okay, is this red widget right here should be getting destroyed when it gets moved off screen and then recreated. And when it's recreated, it'll only rebuild once. This yellow is going to stay right here, and it's going to rebuild every single time we move a frame. Now watch this. 1001, 1002, 1003. You just rebuild 103 times in 3 seconds. And you notice over here, rebuild once. Now, just in case you didn't see that, okay, there's another 112, 125. And this is only rebuilt once, 137. That fast. So don't do this. Bad. Bad developer, no coffee for you. Better way. This is the exact same widget. Okay, it is the same sidebar. This is interesting. Both of these are stateful. Okay, they do have a state. And what's going to happen here is because we're not passing anything in, when we close off the sidebar, the state's not going to change. So since the state never changes, it doesn't rebuild. Now this one is the exact same thing, except it's passing in whether or not the sidebar is visible. And because of that, it has a state change, and it will build every single time the sidebar disappears or reappears. Now, this is going to be really hard to see. Maybe not anymore. You will also see a debug print down here for when this comes and goes. Now, again, it'll always say 1 because it's not rebuilding. When it disappears, it is destroyed. It is gone. When you get another one, it's a new one. It's not the same one. And if you want to maintain the state of what this was when it disappeared, you're going to have to cache that state in state management. This one will never rebuild. There's nothing being passed to it. It just sits there. This one rebuilds every time this bar disappears. So if you watch, we have no rebuilds going on. Poof. Because it's not visible, we rebuilt, but that didn't rebuild. And you can see over here, it's collapsed. And the reason that we can see that is because of right here, debug print collapsed. If the sidebar is changing from visible to not visible. So again, right there, it rebuilt a third time. So it was built the first time when this was visible, the second time when it disappeared, the third time here. And this is not the same red one that was here before. And this one is just sitting here doing nothing. And when I say doing nothing, that's a good thing. It means it's not eating any of your resources. Okay. Fast widget. So the short version of this, we're going to go ahead. No, I was going to say we need to put this code up somewhere because we're not going to have time to go over it.
Got it. No, I just wanted to address one of the questions in the chat about and I think that's a great question. How can we do app responsive on foldable devices? Now you see that foldable devices are going to be the norm soon. You see them popping up in the market, and you see that they don't fall under phone nor tablet. So then a recommendation to that, in my opinion, again, you can take it. For example, you can use some of those, again, the approach that I was mentioning, like content-based breakpoints, meaning like depending on how much content is it that you want to put in your application, make sure that it just fits in that device. You're going to have to test it and then again on that physical device, because that is kind of like one, niche type of device, something very unique. That is not like, it's still like very ubiquitous right now. So in that particular case, you may address it as like a one-off, making sure that in that type of device you can fit your application. But don't forget about, let's say, other devices in which your application can render. But in that particular case, you can just make sure that the content, find like a good happy medium between content consumption, layout, arrangement, and all that, but you're gonna have to do like a little bit of trial and error in order to do that, as opposed to saying like, oh, this is a tablet or a phone, because it kind of doesn't fall, within any of those categories at that point.
Okay, a couple things real quick. The Microsoft Surface Duo emulator.
Oh, that's a good point.
So, yep. Microsoft actually, John Weiss has been working on exactly this for about a year now. It was funny. It was his 20% project and Microsoft picked it up. They built a team around it and they didn't put John on the team. They have since fixed that, I believe. But so yes, all this is definitely out there. You're going to want to look up mainly Flutter on the Surface Duo. That's probably the most mature information you're going to find on there. Now we're really running out of time, so I just want to point out here with the better way, instead of sticking the MediaQuery in your build method, what this is actually going to do is it's going to have a widgets binding observer, and it's going to create an instance. It's going to add the observer in its state, and then of course make sure you dispose of things. Now this is not listening. It is not a dot of. So we're going to make a better media query for size is from the window, MediaQuery dot from window. And we're going to pass it a window. And I created UI.window because what we don't want to do is import Dart UI and then clutter up the namespace and end up having a lot of name collisions. So I made this specifically referred to as UI. So now if this is going to be size width greater than 1,000, okay, then it's going to trigger here. And it only triggers when it changes at 1,000. Okay, so this is a very different thing than the regular media query. And I just put here, you don't want to just toggle this sidebar is visible toggle. Okay, what if it's already the way you want and suddenly you start triggering it in the wrong direction? Okay, maybe you boot it up with it open and it should have been closed. Okay, now every single time you hit that breakpoint, it's going to go the wrong way. So yeah, what you want to do is you want to check if it's false and then change it to true, and then that guarantees it's visible. So then we get down here, and what we're doing, oh, I'm sorry.
No,
I can't see
that every time you call the set state. No, sorry. I think it was a little bit of a lag. Sorry about that. I just wanted to mention that what you said, just emphasize the fact that every time you call the set state, that actually notifies Flutter to rebuild your widget. So imagine at every pixel change, a whole widget rebuild, what Scott just mentioned, actually optimizes and provides a lot more better performance on your application that you can devote to other things, as opposed to just something as simple and kind of like insignificant, you would say, as just like moving the screen. It rebuilds your whole widget tree. Like, it doesn't make sense. Whatever Scott just mentioned right now, using the did change metrics actually brings a lot of performance to your application. And it actually, in my book, that's like one of the best ways to go about it.
So real quick here, just to wrap this up so we can take any other questions.
Sure.
What we're doing here, if you noticed, we're using the variable. We're using the cached value, quote unquote, but it's a variable. And we're checking that instead of rerunning a whole new media query. The first way, we were running a media query, checking the value. Okay, well, that's great. Here, though, we're just checking the value that is sitting there, and the value only changes if this triggers, and this is not going to trigger unless the window hits our breakpoint. Far, 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 far more efficient. Now remember, this one right here, 1 rebuild, okay, and whoops, 10 rebuilds, whoops, 44 rebuilds. No, bad. Okay, this one right here, it's only been built twice. This one never changes. This is brand new. It did not get rebuilt. It got thrown in the trash and changed. And then this one right here, it just built a 3rd time when that changed. But other than that, it's just sitting here. This is not animating. Okay, this is the same frame, so to speak, being repainted over and over again without changing it. Okay, so if you want to see more on this, I suggest you go to the Flutter Community YouTube channel and look up the Hump Day Q&A stream that we just did on Wednesday. Towards the end, about the last 20 minutes or so, Simon Lightfoot does this and goes over it in great detail. If you're not at least an intermediate Flutter developer, I suggest that you bring some headache medicine and coffee and then try to hang on for the ride, because Simon can be very interesting to follow even for advanced Flutter developers, but you will learn a ton, especially about how to do responsive design without unnecessary rebuilds. Okay, so we can wrap this up off screen here. And where are we at?
Wanted to check if anybody
way
else,
too many things on my screen.
Anybody else have any questions for us? It doesn't have to be specifically about responsive design, but any other questions, maybe in Flutter in general, you can take advantage of us being here.
I will definitely put it up on GitHub. We will do that shortly. Now, please remember, this one is designed to be run on Windows. It could, of course, be moved to Mac, but it's not really going to work very well on a mobile device because you can't start yanking the window size around.
I see another question there. Can we get the size of concrete widget on the screen? Are there any cases where we should do this? Yeah, like we mentioned, for example, like a concrete widget, you mean like, for example, like we already explained like how the layout builder works, which actually tells the widget from the parent level, like how those constraints are available. Not like the widget itself, but actually the widget gets like inherited, like what its dimensions are, where that widget can then render itself up for that. So you get those constraints from the parent. So remember, constraints go down. So like that. Cases where you should do this, again, remember, like we were just explaining, like you should be able to use like the media queries, like let's say when you're querying the window size, and then even let's say when you have like an application, let's say a split view type of detail, like like a column on the left and then the main content on the right. Even individual widgets may even have their own media queries underneath, inside of it, or their own constraints. So you should be able to maybe like individual regions or widgets can also, you should be able to like know how much size there is available in there, or like, whatever the layout widget is for those, or the layout builder is for those, so that you can feed the information in there. But yeah, I think there are cases where you may want to do it, but the layout widget, if you use it in combination with the media query, you should be able to get a lot of very far with that.
And also, if you just need to print this on the screen, personally, I would do layout builder, and then I would put a text in there. And for the string, exactly, I would put constraints dot. You would want to do constraints dot max width or constraints dot max height, min width, min height, to string, and then that is in your text, and boom, right there, you got it.
You can see it.
State management. Which state management is scalable? The main ones are block, and you could use provider, but the guy, it's interesting. The Flutter team recommends provider, but the guy who wrote provider recommends Riverpod. He wrote Riverpod to overcome provider shortcomings, but the Flutter team waits until something is virtually bulletproof before recommending it. Believe me, people were writing Flutter apps for production in alpha. So can you imagine how stable things had to be before the Flutter team would turn around and say it's ready? Okay, and what is the best way to handle the text scaling factor when the user changes the text size? Honest answer, don't. Yeah. Let the user make their own decisions. If the text overflow, sooner or later, if they make the text big enough, it's going to overflow. You do not want to adapt for that. Let that be their problem.
That's exactly what I was going to say.
Because if you start overriding what they say, they're going to get mad at you.
That's exactly what I was going to say. Let the user let the text flow, and like try not to fight like the text. Another way again that we also do to kind of like let the text flow. Make sure that you don't put it, for example, like within like constrained containers. Like you usually put it, let's say, within an expanded, so that it actually flows naturally. You could use strategies like let's say do like text ellipsis or something like that, like to maybe like truncate it a little bit, but try not to force, let's say, go against like whatever the user settings, what the users have set, because that's kind of like what they want to do. So totally agree.
Okay, and another fun thing is that, as you were just mentioning there, how to handle cutoff, you can also do a fade. And
I love the fade. I love the fade.
But in order to learn Flutter and learn some tricks with it, here's what I want you to do. I want you to figure out how to fade, not the end fading away. I want to see you fade the bottom half of a sentence. It can be done. Figure it out. All right, with that, I think we are pretty much just about over time, aren't we?
No, I think we're right on time. Right on time. I just wanted to see if anybody else had any other questions, but I love the.
I think we've been abandoned.
No, you are not. So yeah, actually we are on time. Thank you so much for, just having these conversations, like really exciting. And then we had lots of questions I saw, and then lots of answers. Thank you so much, Scott and Roman. This was, amazing. And then we will see each other maybe in one of the events that we will, host soon. So yeah, once again, and I'm here to just close out the event. But have a great weekend for both of you. And then I will, kind of go into the other details with the audience right now that we are watching.
All right. Well, thank you so much for having us.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
Alrighty. Okay, that's a wrap. So thank you everyone for joining Between the Brackets today. I hope you all enjoyed this episode. And we would like to kindly request from you to fill out the feedback survey in the follow-up emails or the link on the chat and the screen that we share, so we can improve the show along the way. So you can use our hashtag Between the Brackets to share how this show was for you. And also, we are going to have our next episode next month. We will be giving you more information if you sign up on the website already and subscribe to our channel on YouTube. So please let us know if you have any questions. You can email us at b2b-team@google.com. And we are looking forward to seeing you next month. Till then, take care and then stay safe.